Hi, everybody. This remote is driving me nuts. I'm so sorry, but hello. Hi, happy Tuesday, and welcome to another episode of this. I, we might have to update the setup here soon because the phone thing ain't working so well. So today I want to talk about movies that kind of got to you. Now, as a lifelong horror fan, there are movies that thrill me, movies that I enjoy, I love the story, and movies that, they elicit certain emotional responses, but in the long run don't necessarily get to me. The word I always use is bother. That movie bothered me, or that book bothered me. And it's not something that happens very often, but when it does, and sometimes it's for really stupid reasons too. It's not always because the storytelling was super effective. So I'm going to talk about two movies. One where there's a reason behind why this movie bothered me, but it's not a great reason. And then two, this is the main movie I want to talk about because the main movie I want to talk about, I haven't seen a lot of people talk about it. I don't see a lot of social media posts about it. And a friend of mine recently watched it and was messaging me and was like, whoa, this movie. And it's like, yeah, oh God, yeah, that movie. So the first movie I want to talk about is Drag Me to Hell, the Sam Raimi movie, where this movie is one that hasn't aged well. I don't think it aged well when it first came out either. Like, Samwise Raimi, what are you doing with this gypsy fear, the racism and all of that? It's a it's a movie that could have been saved, I think, if not for the racism, because in very traditional Sam Raimi fashion, it's balls to the wall crazy, and it was a fun watch, but ultimately it's just kind of like a meh movie. Again, if we're discounting the racism, when we include the racism, it's like, okay, I've got better things to watch. But this movie bothered me. It got to me. There was something about it that really got under my skin. And after the first time I watched it, like a week later, I had to watch it again because I had to really get my finger on what was bugging me about this movie. What about it got under my skin? And in the case of this movie, uh, aside again from the racism, this movie, I think, set out to have you on someone's side. But at the end of the movie, if you've never seen it, I'm going to spoil it for you. At the end of the movie, our main character gets dragged to hell in a very kind of like fast but surprising way. And then the movie just ends. Like, the movie ends on Justin Long's surprised, horrified face, like, done. And that was jarring, but I think the thing that ended up getting to me, the thing was because if you're not paying attention, you don't realize it. I've said before on one of the many things I do on a weekly basis, I think I did it on the Case for Classics podcast, where I talk about storytellers are master manipulators. They will get you siding with a character who maybe in your real life you would see as a problematic person, who maybe you would see as this doesn't align with the way I like to live my life. And it's kind of a gotcha moment sometimes when you realize that you've been buying into this thing that in your real life you normally wouldn't. And I think that happens in this movie. On subsequent watches of it, I've seen it maybe 3 times, I've realized that our main character, though she is presented as sweet and innocent and having good motives, actually isn't a good person. This main character is actually a bad, selfish, self-concerned kind of person. This is not the type of person that we want too many of these running around in a productive society, you know? Um, and ultimately, I mean, I don't know if it was on purpose. That's the thing that's driving me crazy. I don't think it was on purpose, but ultimately, it's this selfishness of hers. It's this wrong way of thinking that ultimately leads to her demise in every way, with the run in with the old lady, and then in her journey to try to save herself, she goes about it wrong. And I, I, I don't know if it was on purpose because she's a bad person and she goes to hell. There's that morality story. I just, I don't know. I don't know. It was the realizing, the kind of watching it more carefully and seeing how she acts, seeing little clues about how she's ashamed of where she came from, how she's trying to hide that, how she changed the way she looks so that she could look a little more metropolitan. This kind of, it's, you know, not all people who are bad are self-loathing, and not all people who are self-loathing are bad, but it seems to be the starting point for her going down a bad place. And I just watching it again and seeing how wrong she was about things, how wrong she was about how she treated people. And she does realize to a certain extent how she messed up, but it comes from a place of self-preservation, all of it. And you know, when you first watch it, you're in it. You're on her side. You want to see her prevail. But and when she doesn't, it's like, oh, well, shit. You know, we got a non-happy ending with this. But when you watch it again, you're like, wow, she kind of doesn't deserve it. She's kind of an asshole. So that's a movie that kind of got under my skin because I needed to watch it again and try to understand it. If you don't want to watch this movie, I completely understand. But that's one that kind of bothered me. Now, the other movie that I want to talk about that kind of bothered me is the movie Poughkeepsie Tapes. Is it the Poughkeepsie Tapes? The Poughkeepsie Tapes. I'm so bad with those. This movie, okay, so there's a story behind this movie. It is just recently, and I'm 38 years old. When I say recently, that could be up to 5 years ago. But it has recently been put on streaming services, and you can buy it on a Blu-ray. Thank you, Scream Factory. This movie was made in 2007. It debuted at the Tribeca Film Festival in 2007, and it just kind of got stuck in distribution hell after that. MGM was going to release it and give it a theatrical release, and all these starts and stops with getting this movie not only just released, but getting it distribution, and it was a problem. And there was a time when it looked like you were not going to be able to watch this movie unless you got it from a torrent site. And full disclosure, you know, at this time I did illegally download it and watch it. I have since bought my own copy. I totally believe in taking care of the creators. And let me tell you, this movie. So back in the day, before I started professionally writing, before I started doing all this nonsense, it was really hard when Netflix was first getting started. When you had to get movies only through DVD through Netflix, it was hard to find really good scary movies because back then the studios weren't really releasing much, and there weren't the smaller studios like A24 and Blumhouse and these other smaller places. It was hard to kind of get your finger on what horror movies were coming out because they were all smaller studios. They were all a lot of them were Canadian studios. Canadian studios were putting out some pretty funky horror movies back in the day, in the early aughts and the early teens. So what I would do is I would follow blogs of movie reviewers, the kind of bloggers who would go to the film festivals and watch these movies and then recommend them. The ones who specialized in horror had really great detailed blogs, and the time to do it I found was in February or March. This was when the circuits would start, and then when, you know, they would really start picking up and start recommending movies. And the Poughkeepsie Tapes was a movie that I saw kept getting recommended, and they kept saying, but you won't be able to find it, but you won't be able to find it, but you won't be able to find it. And one blogger eventually said, and I don't know if this is true, I highly doubt it, said, you know, this movie has gone into distribution hell. The movie makers have put it up on a torrent site so at least people can watch it. And I believed it while also not believing it, but just making myself feel better for doing this. I feel awful for doing it. So that's why I bought my own copy. But I watched this movie, and what it is it is a, it's a documentary style movie, like think true crime about a serial killer, where the story is told through interviews and snippets from tapes. That's what the Poughkeepsie Tapes are. The Poughkeepsie Tapes are sort of interviews with the people involved and snippets of these homemade snuff films that the serial killer made. And what's amazing about it is it doesn't show a lot. There are horrible things that happen in this movie, but they don't really show it. And there's one of the, like, you see people being tortured and you see them upset and you see the horror of it all, but there's actually not a whole lot of gore in this movie. It's all very, very subtle. This whole story is told with a very light touch. And there's one scene in this movie that actually I jumped off the couch to be like, oh, are you kidding? Because the serial killer takes I'm going to do a little bit of a spoiler, just a little bit. Please watch this movie, but a little bit spoiler. The serial killer takes a person that he keeps alive to torture, and this person is eventually saved. And there's a lot of interview tapes with this person talking about what she went through and talking about her experiences with this serial killer, what kind of person he was like. And it's like what you're looking at right now. It's a lot of just this. And there's a you kind of start, well, how bad was it? You know, you look fine. You know, I'm glad you're okay. And they keep talking about police officers, how they found her and being like, you know, it was one of the worst things we've ever seen. And okay, you know, she really bucked up. She really pulled out of this. But there's a scene later, it's a very small, fast scene where she's talking and she just kind of does one of these, you know, like you see me doing constantly. I'm fussing with my hair or I'll do this. Very, very fast scene where she just kind of does one of those. That scene, oh my God, that is the most horrific thing they show in the movie. And if you don't get why that is, watch the movie. Like I said, it's all handled with a very light touch, and yet it's one of the most horrifying movies I've seen in the past 10 years. Now, when this movie was released, like, it got bad reviews. I'm sorry, my neighbors are mowing. But, like, Rue Morgue didn't really like it. Blu-ray.com didn't really like it. Bloody Disgusting did. I really like Bloody Disgusting. I like to go to them for movie recs because their tastes align more with my own personal tastes. But I once read an article, and I don't know why, because I'm not a wine drinker, but I once read an article about wine and wine reviews where the person said, you know, take wine reviews with a grain of salt, because what happens is they sit down and they taste many, many wines in one sitting. And after so many tastes, what will start popping through to you are the ones that have more of an alcohol taste, more of a strong taste. And that doesn't necessarily mean if you were going to sit and try a whole glass of it, that it would be so good. And I am definitely someone who thinks I'm turning into Popeye. I think that there's a lot of pretension surrounding wine thanks to that fucking movie Sideways, which is a great movie, but boy, it spawned a bunch of butt sniffers, you know? I was born blue collar, I will stay that way. Like, I've got family members who are like that, and it is kind of insufferable where they do believe the most expensive bottles are the better ones. They are appalled by twist caps and boxed wines, no matter how many awards boxed wines win. And but it made me think, you know, when you're testing something, so many, you know, it would be the more stronger things that would stand out. So I have to think that these reviewers at Rue Morgue and Blu-ray.com, who knows how many movies they have to watch, something that is handled with such a light touch as the Poughkeepsie tapes is, would seem a little downplayed. It would seem a little underdone. It would seem like a tease. And I think tease is one of the words used by one of these reviewers. You tease things but don't show it. And I have to argue that that's the thing that makes it horrifying. When you're studying being a writer, everybody will tell you, show, don't tell. Which all writing advice needs to be taken with a grain of salt. But this movie doesn't show a lot. It tells you things, but you don't see it. And in a visual medium, that can be very unsettling because your mind has to fill in the blanks. And depending on how twisted your imagination is, it gets bad. And I just think that the very light touch that they used in the telling of this movie is fantastic. This movie got to me. This movie bothered me. So if you haven't seen it, I really, really do recommend it, because this is a movie that actually got under my skin. This is a movie that I watched it and kind of had to sit with it a little bit. I kind of needed to come down from that, because it was like, wow, that movie was fucked up. And that doesn't happen a lot. You'll watch a movie and be like, oh, I wish they'd handled that better. Or, oh, that was a great movie. That was so much fun. Or, oh, that was so messed up. But there's really ones that just kind of take the air out of you. And that one did. So if you've seen it, chime in. Did you hate it? I mean, obviously, this is all very subjective, but did you hate it? Do you agree with Rue Morgan and Blu-ray.com that it was a little too light of a touch? Because I gotta tell you, it worked for me, and it worked for my friend. And I don't see this movie getting talked about enough, and I really think it should be talked about more. Thank goodness you could. I think I saw it on Netflix. You can definitely find it on streaming services, and you can buy a physical copy for yourself. So that'll be it for me today. My neighbors are being so noisy. I will be back next week, and I have no idea what I'll talk about. If you have any questions, obviously throw them at me and I'll make a video on that. But yeah, have you watched the Poughkeepsie tapes? What did you think of it? If you haven't, did I just talk you into it? And I hope the universe is treating you all well, better than this goddamn remote is treating me. And I will talk to you all next week. Thank you for watching and being here with me and my sporadic schedule. So I'll see you next week. Bye bye. I don't know why I wave. Let's see. Is it gonna turn off? It's doing a thing. It's doing a thing.